Time for FOMO, and today, Jenny, a forgotten name for many maybe is Etsy, and it's the name that is the subject of our discussion today. Looking at its performance, it's been forgettable, I would say, over the last couple of years. It's been lackluster at best, as it's struggled, falling 28, almost 30% here over the year. And this is after a pretty disappointing 2022 as well. So huge boon during the pandemic recovery period and the subsequent kind of fall. So the roller coaster ride on the descent now. But, you know, a little bit of bright hope, light of hope here to close out the year. A nice move since the last earnings release.
Right. I mean, we are up 12% this month, but I would say I would have said it was forgettable like 2-3 months ago. But now looking at it still down 30% this year, it's almost memorable, and not for a good reason, because this name has not caught a bid from any of the strength we've seen in November and December. I mean, I know we are now up 12% this year, but like overall in terms of their performance, still not enough to erase any of those losses.
Down about 30% in the year, but up about 46% off the lows I'm seeing in Etsy as it makes a little bit of a recovery. Those lows set, you know, back in October, so it had some fun in November, but it just, you got to get the magnifying glass out to see it.
You're right. And to their credit, we are off the lows by 46%. I mean, that is substantial for the stock that's still down 29% this year. But last week, they did have some news. They announced laying off roughly 11% of their marketplace workforce. Comes as the site has been grappling this increased competition from some unsuspecting players, at least as far as my universe goes. Shein and Temu, those are both based, or they just have a substantial exposure in China. They also have faced the slowdown in consumer spending, which I wouldn't even say it's been a slowdown, more so the reallocation of consumer spending. But it's been interesting to see, because even Amazon has ramped up its efforts to compete with a lot of these quickly emerging online discount retailers coming from China. Last week, Amazon did announce plans to establish an innovation center in China to then have various offerings to help a lot of its Asia Pacific sellers then distribute and package and market a lot of their different products. So if Amazon is seeing these major companies as a threat, I think no doubt it's a major threat for Etsy. Etsy expects to incur roughly 25 to 30 million in charges as a result of their overall restructuring, primarily in their fourth quarter of 2023. And following this announcement, analysts updated their coverage, most of which was optimistic, but Wedbush was one that said that this actually does show that they see limited top-line improvement in 2024, Etsy that being. The analysts did say particularly what's concerning is the competitive pressure from these Chinese online retailers, suggesting everyone's right now vying for a very limited market share, as well as the escalating costs right now to advertise, again, given the fact that online advertising is also a pretty tight market right now. The analyst kept a neutral rating and a price target of $90 a share, saying there is still growth potential despite some of these near-term challenges. We did also hear Friday afternoon from Guggenheim, which did also give a $95 price target that was up from $75 with a buy rating. So another analyst that feels pretty optimistic. But all in all, I think that no one's discounting the fact that this company is facing some serious competition from China, which is a market, I guess, that right now you don't necessarily want to compete in when you haven't had the most exciting couple of years as far as shareholders are concerned.
Now, I haven't read the stories, but Temu and Shein, I mean, you can look on any news site from Bloomberg to the Times, Fox Business, you name it. There's some interesting things going on there. Mafia-style intimidation being alleged by Temu against Shein. So they got their own issues with some of those e-commerce sites, so that's something to maybe keep in your mind. Now, I'm going to call back to a firm. We talked about a company that had no earnings as far out as you want to project. Etsy, well, maybe they don't have GMS, as they call it, gross merchandise sales, growing at an impressive clip anymore, only 1.25%. Been, down, quite a bit over the last few quarters. They do make money, and they've actually been using sort of their ace up the sleeve, where they've actually ratcheted up their take rate a little bit. They've increased fees on their sellers. Now, I don't know if that'll backfire down the line. They do still have active sellers growing, it seems, active buyers growing as well. But they're making more money off the sales that they have, as revenue was up 7%, where the actual sales or gross merchandise sales only up 1%. So they're making more money of slowing growth, which is not what you're seeing in a lot of these industries.
And you'd think that'd be a good thing, right? Because they're able to still monetize each transaction more than they previously were, right? So that's a good thing. I think what also needs to be discussed when looking at Etsy is the fact they've raised their overall cost for those third-party sellers. They do operate in a way where they're trying to make it the most attractive to sell on their platform while making themselves still profitable, while also keeping their sellers and buyers happy. And that's difficult. It's almost somewhat like, I'd say, the economy that is all things Uber, and I know they're totally different companies, but you operate in a business model where you outsource basically the majority of your company, those being like the drivers, and those drivers need to make a certain amount of money to be happy, and then the drivers or riders have to pay, they want to keep costs low. Right now, I feel like Etsy has struggled with that. They've struggled to keep their third-party manufacturers happy, and then they've also struggled to keep then costs down for consumers, where right now it's relatively costly to shop on Etsy. That's been somewhat of the theme of the last several years, where it feels like you're probably being hit with more and more fees, but all that matters to you at checkout is the fact that it's not cheap. And I know that I'm obviously in the minority thinking here. I don't see names like Shein and Temu being like direct competitors. I know they're all e-commerce, but Etsy specializes in handmade goods, and a lot of these more small businesses are selling on Etsy. So that's couldn't be more actually opposite of what Shein, for example, specializes. That's fast, cheap fashion. There's like numerous documentaries exposing the way that it's like horrible for the environment, but nonetheless, I do think that what has been Etsy's biggest threat, unfortunately, is Amazon. Right now, Amazon's marketplace, they have a whole wide variety of like handmade, specifically goods, and Amazon, I'm sure, because just given their vast scale, I should probably double check this, but I'm just assuming as like a third party, it might be cheaper to sell on Amazon, and that's a problem.
Is there anything holding you back from selling on Instagram, Etsy, and Amazon all at the same time? To me, these look like these are just places that you can go as someone who's trying to sell these goods. Now, what I would think is your goal would be to be in many places you can, and then graduate to where your brand is big enough that you could use something like Shopify to host your own site. That would be the goal. So I almost see Etsy as this is something that takes your local corner store that was kind of a boutique that you'd stumble across on a day, walk around the area, and it's brought it to the world. It's allowed local places to reach consumers and end markets that they never would have been able to do before. The same way Instagram shopping, the same way Amazon has done. So as you mentioned, though, the big thing here is what's beneficial for Etsy is counterintuitive for those who are selling on the platform. It's this constant yin-yang, pulling back and forth tug of war where you want to keep as much of your sale as possible, but Etsy wants to keep as much of your sale as possible too, and that's always going to be the issue.
Yeah, and I think you also make a really good point where they don't necessarily have to be like pitted against Amazon, because as a seller, I'm sure you're on various marketplaces, not just Etsy, but it just seems like right now with the power going against companies where they can offer lower rates and they can offer more percentages of your overall sales, it's a difficult environment because as a seller, you can be so selective. But to your point, again, these are like basically mom and pop shops, or a lot of, I know, individual artists that sell on Etsy, because it's relatively affordable and it's just the most easily accessible way to do so. So it's unfortunate to me. I feel like I have like a spot in my heart for Etsy, just given the fact they do sell a lot of really, really cool products, especially as we head into this holiday season. It's a great place to get various gifts and things like you would not be able to get necessarily at a store, and especially not at Shein or Temu.